Good morning and buenos dias. Welcome to KConnect's Accountability Partners Council. I am Adnorisbo Torres, Project Supervisor for the Strong Beginnings, Healthy Start, Strong Fathers, Padres Fuertes project. We are extremely glad to see so many people online today. Please make sure that you're sitting at a table with other participants. This is the Accountability Partners Council, so we want people to have partners around them. A table captain has been assigned to you, so you should be welcomed. If you're having any technical issues, please visit the Help Lounge on the left-hand side of the screen. The wonderful people of ARIA Studio are here to help.
Good morning, happy Friday. Ashanti Bryant here, Director of Early Childhood Services at IFF and Prenatal to Third Grade Work Group Co-Chair. Before we get started with our agenda, I'd like to introduce some of the people that make our work possible. Work group chairs, our facilitators, the Board of Trustees, lead convening partners, and our backbone team.
So today we will be transitioning between small groups and main presentations today. Each table has been assigned a table captain, as we said earlier. They're here to answer your questions and help you walk through the entire process. We encourage you to fully participate in group in the discussions in order to get the most out of this convening.
The APC, the Accountability Partners Council, is where the entire network gathers to seek perspective on the work that KConnect and its partners bring forward. This is not a typical conference. Each of you on the call and on the meeting will be expected to sort of roll up your sleeves and work today. There will be multiple opportunities to offer feedback, to contribute, ask questions that will shape the work of KConnect moving forward. We do encourage you to have those pre-reads pulled up and be prepared to take notes so that you can share at your tables during the discussions.
So today we all come together around the following 5 different cultural values.
Yep.
Yes, and. Try to accept what your other group members are saying and then expand on that line of thinking. Try not to say no. Experimentation. Everything we do is somewhat experimental. This is an environment that says got it, not gotcha. Accountability. Accountability means that the work groups or community partners give an overview of their plans, and the APC offers feedback and affirmation. So the decisions and rules. We use a low-pressure decision-making method when presented with strategies or other initiatives. Listening. Listening is essential. Please listen well to everyone in your group and in the APC.
The APC is a courageous or a brave space and not a safe space. A safe space is nurtured for often comfort, which can reinforce current power dynamics. A brave space, on the other hand, has 5 elements: controversy with civility, owning intentions and impacts, challenging by choice, personal reflection, and no attacks in the work. These elements make for a space where everyone feels welcome and like they can speak freely. Let's ensure that our convening today has a brave space and not necessarily a safe space.
So right now, let's take a moment to review what we accomplished together at the May APC. We learned about system-level strategies around birth equity, early literacy, and housing stability. We reviewed the KConnect vision. We experienced the gallery walk, focused on learning more about the network and its work. We aligned with the student well-being work happening across Kent County's ISD.
Our agenda for the day, for today's meeting, includes the following: learning more about the work in the community to create an inclusive economy in Kent County with multiple opportunities to provide feedback, hearing about the launch of the new Housing Collective Impact Organization. It's going to be good. Learning about initiatives that highlight KConnect's neutral convening and facilitation with community partners, And then you can find out all of today's meeting information, including the pre-reads, forms, etc., at the link listed on the screen.
All right, I'm excited.
Yeah, it's good.
I would like to now turn it over to Al Vandenberg, the new Kent County Administrator.
Thank you, Bo. Thank you. Good morning. I'm going to go ahead and just interrupt for a second here. As you know, when we live within a virtual world, we have some technical difficulties. And so my name is Salvador Lopez, president of KConnect. And what I would like to do today is welcome everyone to the APC. Again, having some technical difficulties with Al, but we're hoping to have Al come back online at some point. And so I just wanted to say to you all, thank you for being here. The APC is really about bringing people together, right? Yeah. And when I look up on the stage and I see Bo and Ashanti, the team behind the scenes, we work extremely hard to make sure that we bring people together throughout the year. And so I'm just really excited to have you all. Typically, the backbone team is really good at staying behind the scenes, moving the work forward. But at this point, you know, we roll with it. And I just want to say thank you for being here. I welcome you all. And I look forward to talking to you a little bit later wearing a different hat. With that being said, welcome to the APC. We're excited to have you here, excited to learn a lot about some amazing initiatives happening around the county, and we look forward to having more conversations going forward. Thank you. At this point, I'm going to pitch it back to Ashanti to take it from here.
Fantastic. Thanks, Al. So again, we're excited to hear from Al probably a little bit later in our time today, and excited about his leadership in Kent County. Now, I'd like to introduce our next three presenters who will be walking the APC through the work that our community is exploring in order to create an inclusive economy and where we go from here. Dr. Juan Olivares was most recently the Distinguished Scholar in Residence for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Johnson Center for Philanthropy at GVSU, Grand Valley State University. He also serves on the KConnect Board of Trustees. Joe Jones, President and CEO of the Hakima Group, LLC, and current commissioner in the 2nd Ward of Grand Rapids. And finally, Randy Thalen, the new president and CEO of The Right Place.
Ashanti, and thank you all for joining us this morning. It's great to have you. So we're going to spend some time this morning focused on inclusive growth, inclusive economies. After a short presentation, you're going to have the opportunity to have a facilitated discussion at your tables and provide feedback on a series of discussion questions. We'll also be sharing the table's work with the larger group towards the end. So let's get started. Inclusive growth means that more people share in the rewards of a growing economy and community. It's both a process and an outcome. It's economic growth that prioritizes neighborhood-level needs, embraces the potential of local economies, puts factors like health and education on par with job creation, and closes the widening income inequality that we have. Inclusive growth communities are those that invest through philanthropy, public policy, financial decisions, and community commitments in the success of efforts like workforce training and talent development, entrepreneurship and small business success, personal financial security and access to financial resources, neighborhood development and growth, transportation and access, and also reducing the gaps that we see in health, education, safety, and housing. So across the country, communities are coming together around inclusive growth. We're learning that these promising practices include collaboration among sectors and systems with a common agenda, commitments with the will for the long haul to sustain efforts over time, long-term investments in necessary resources, and a community engagement process for decision-making.
Well, good morning to all. Good morning to my friends, both Juan and to Randy. And if I were in Paris, I would say bonjour. If I were in Germany, I would say guten Morgen. If I were in Guadalajara, I would say buenos dias. If I were in Detroit, I would say what up, though. But I'm in Grand Rapids. I'm saying good morning. Good morning to everyone on this beautiful Friday morning. And it's a reminder to get things started. And that is when we talk about inclusive growth, we have to understand that everyone has a role to play, including you, those of you who are part of this coming together on this morning, as well as others in community. Inclusive growth will take rewiring relationships within the community to address barriers while focusing on economic interventions, while ensuring what I would call it an unobstructed pipeline from prenatal to career. This is going to include people in economic development and growth, as well as early childhood, K-12 education, philanthropy, business, healthcare, and beyond. You know, the question can be asked, what exactly does an inclusive region look like? A non-inclusive region has barriers that prevent access to opportunity for the region's residents, resulting in less regional economic growth. An inclusive region, however, provides increased access to opportunity for all residents, creating sustained economic growth. An example of an inclusive region would be someplace like Cleveland, Ohio. The Mayor's Neighborhood Transformation Initiative is aimed at providing healthy, sustainable, and equitable opportunities to build wealth and stabilize historically marginalized neighborhoods. Through this initiative, the city and its partners are able to offer new tools and programs and resources to build wealth and to stabilize neighborhoods. They are building an inclusive growth economy by focusing on three main areas: mixed-use development, residential development, and entrepreneurship and workforce development. There are many other communities in the nation that are doing similar work. We're watching them closely and we'll be monitoring, and the plan is to monitor their success. But here in our own community, in our beloved Grand Rapids, the 616, there are examples of inclusive growth initiatives that we're monitoring. They include, but aren't limited to, Plaza Roosevelt, the Ready by 5 millage, and the Housing Stability Alliance. Cities are equitable when all the residents, regardless of their race, ethnicity, their geography, their neighborhood of residence, or other factors, are fully able to participate in the area's economic vitality and contribute to the city's readiness for the future and to connect to the assets and the resources.
Right now, Kent County is not an inclusive growth community. Inclusive growth is both a process and an outcome, as I said earlier. However, so far, our community has achieved neither of these things. However, we have assets in our community that can be harnessed. We have a philanthropic community that is very involved in Kent County, a growing political will for inclusive growth, a very involved business community, and a growing grassroots movement around a more equitable economy. So why haven't we reached an inclusive economy in our community here? Well, like in many communities, there's a lack of collaboration among sectors and systems, commitments to stay in it for the long duration of the work, investments in necessary infrastructure that are needed. There's a lack of community engagement and decision-making, adequate employment opportunities, adequate education and skill development. There's a lack of infrastructure, both social and physical, and a lack of innovative solutions and systems integration. Evidence suggests that collaborations across public, private, and nonprofit sectors are the critical factor in tackling this complexity and creating communities' success. Evidence also suggests that we need to build coalitions that utilize a more diverse set of firms, workers, and communities to reach their productive potential and offer a compelling opportunity for inclusive growth.
You see, nationally, we know that African American households today earn less than white households did 50 years ago. In Kent County, we see a similar story. You see, in 2019, a white family's median household income was just over $87,000, compared to a Latinx family's median income at $52,000, and an African American family's median income at $46,000. When we look at local unemployment rates, African American workers are 3 times more likely to be unemployed than white Kent County workers. If you look at educational attainment, which is a key milestone for how much an individual will earn over their lifetime, you see that white students are nearly 3 times more likely to graduate on time with an associate's or bachelor's degree compared to African American and Latinx students. Finally, my brothers and sisters, let's take a look at the region's economic vitality. How are we doing on measures of economic growth and well-being? Kent County's job growth has consistently outpaced that of the nation as a whole, and its gross regional product is catching up to the national average. Wages have declined since 1979 for all workers, but most drastically in the bottom half of the wage distribution. African American workers' wages in Kent County is 63 cents for every dollar that white workers make, while Latinx make 69 cents for every dollar. These statistics are part of a trend across the United States, where increasing prosperity is not shared by all. Here in Kent County, we invest significant assets into strategies that address poverty, health inequities, limited access to quality education, affordable housing, community development, and economic development. Yet, despite these efforts, too many people have not only fallen behind, but they have done so despite overall growth and resurgence of our beloved community.
Yeah, Juan and Joe, thanks for having me join this panel today. Salvador and the team at KConnect, I'm honored to be here and have this conversation today. It's as Joe noted, the data is pretty overwhelming, and it's data that frankly we've all probably known for some time. I can tell you about a year ago at this time, I was going through the search process for the position I now hold here at the Right Place, and I was doing my homework as you would expect and researching kind of what had happened in the West Michigan market, and 2 things stood out. You know, one, as I come into the Right Place driving the regional economic development strategy, it was clear to me that a technology sector investment is needed to grow new exciting jobs for young people. The second piece, though, and the one that we're here to talk about today, is this incredible, extraordinary disparity that we see throughout our community. When I was doing research at that time, the data point that stood out and still stands out is from 2008 to 2018, the greater Grand Rapids area actually had the best among 53 metros across the country with 1 million people or more. We had the best performance in terms of closing the income gap between people of color and whites. At the same time, and the number that haunts me and should haunt all of us, the job opportunity for both whites and people of color, we ranked 45th out of 53, which is purely unacceptable and something we have to get after. Joe mentioned earlier that everyone has a role. Here at the Right Place, I believe we have a role, and it's something that is a personal passion of mine. And as I went through the search process, I made it clear to the board and to the search committee that if they wanted to hire me, to understand that this is something that we have to lean in. We all have a role. The Right Place has a role. Many of the partners that I see attending here today, who I've had a chance to meet with in the first 6 or so months here, working together. And so in the last handful of months at the Right Place, we've done some things to start this work, because I think at this stage, we know the data, we know the challenge, we have to get after it, and all of us need to play our parts to move us forward. You know, here we do a lot of work with companies trying to create more job opportunities, more career pathways, and connecting them to the talent development resources that are out there, helping our companies frankly get away from that 45th out of 53 and really move us towards the top in terms of job opportunities, and partnering with groups like the Urban League, like the Hispanic Center, like the Hispanic Chamber, Goodwill, and others, trying to find ways to connect employers up to these incredible resources. We're working on diversifying the business ownership Justin Bean at the Transformation Center shared with me a study the other day. We only have 71 companies of color that are making sales of $250,000 or more. We're in a 1 million person population. Only 71 companies meet that threshold. That's unacceptable, and we have to lean in and make that happen. My predecessor, Birgit Close, helped launch the new Communities Transformation Fund. It's an investment fund that has now $10 million available, on its way to $25 million, to try to invest in minority entrepreneurs and minority business leaders, leaning into that. We're also doing work around supply chain diversification efforts. We've launched a diverse business directory earlier this summer. We have 1,400 businesses represented on that list of underrepresented entrepreneurs. It consistently is among the top web pages on our website. So we're leveraging the reach of the right place to shine a light on opportunities across the region, and partnering with folks. The Grand Rapids Chamber of Commerce has tremendous diversity programs we partner with. West Michigan Hispanic Chamber, Guillermo, I see, is on the call. We do work to try to amplify those efforts as well. I think maybe most importantly, we are growing our talent and workforce systems support. We've made a big move here at the right place. We've added a senior vice president of talent and diversity. It's the first time we've had anybody on staff with a title that has diversity attached to it. We recognize the disconnect in our workforce systems where we have to lean in and help connect our employers to those resources. And I'm pleased to say we've got an amazingly talented person on staff. I think today represents Tarita's last day of the first month on the job, and she's already making a positive impact. I expect she'll be a force in the community, a force in the region going forward. And finally, I would say next year, the right place historically has developed strategies in 3-year increments. Next year, we start writing up our new strategic plan, and I assure you, inclusive growth is going to be a key pillar of our strategy. As I've made my way around the region since starting here back in March, it's clear to me that inclusive growth is the strategy around inclusive growth. It's not a matter of if we're going to do it. My conversations with leadership around the community, it's very clear consensus is there that this is something we must get moving on. It's not a matter of when. The time is clearly now. We could argue the time was yesterday, but we can only work with now. And so the time is now to move this forward. It's really a matter of how. How are we going to proceed? How are we going to move forward? How is everybody going to find their role within this inclusive growth strategy and move forward? We know the data. We know the issues. Now we need to find that path forward. And I'm looking forward to the conversation today and working with all of you to help advance this forward.
Thank you, Randy, and thank you for all to continue to work in the right place and really focus on inclusive growth. What needs to be developed as we talk about this is an inclusive growth system that is dissolving economic inequalities from the face of Kent County. We must face and do better. We have to do better at the connectedness that's needed between our sectors and partners, and a system leadership table focused on coordinating and convening community for inclusive growth needs to happen somehow. And that's why you're here today, to help us explore that. Inclusive growth aligns the KConnect the work plan across all that continuum that you see. It includes early childhood and K-12 education, college access and completion, business ownership, thriving family income, and home and family stability. These are all important to where we need to be.
Thank you, Juan, and thank you, Randy. Both of you, I very much appreciate you, brothers, both your heart and your passion and your unapologetic direction or your intentions regarding inclusive growth. As we get closer to breaking out into our discussion groups, we think that it's important to acknowledge that Grand Rapids has a history that has brought up diversity, equity, and inclusion time and time again. But these conversations have not led to realized racial equity. Now that you have a foundation to work from, we're going to go to our tables for small group discussions. I'd like to welcome my sister Tracy Kaufman, Program Officer of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, introduce the discussion questions and facilitate our discussions this morning. Tracy?
Oh, good morning, everybody. It's so good to be with you here today. I'm hoping that one day, very soon, I'll be able to see all your faces in person, but I know we're not there yet. So we are here virtually still. But like Joe said, we're going to break out into your tables to have discussion. There are 2 questions that we want you to discuss here. The first one being, and your table captains will have these questions, so no need to memorize them. How has systematic racism disrupted or prevented previous initiatives from achieving an equitable economy here in Kent County? Second, how do we address the previously mentioned barriers? And when you're discussing this, we're interested in hearing your short-term examples, long-term examples, and then any other suggestions that you may have. You're going to have 20 minutes per question. Your table captains will be taking notes about questions that your table has about this topic, and then also any themes that may arrive. Once we're done with those questions and discussing them, we're going to all come back to and have an all APC-wide discussion. And you'll have the opportunity to ask Juan and Joe and Randy any follow-up questions that you had or issues that came up during your table discussions. We'll then take a break, and when we come back, we'll have a couple of more questions for you to discuss at your tables. Remember, if you need any assistance with technology, if you look off to the right of your screen, there's a help table, and you can go to that help table and receive assistance. So we'll go to our breakouts. Thank you so much. Hello, welcome back, everybody. I hope all of your discussions went well. We are going to bring back our panelists back on stage. So if we can get Juan, Joe, and Randy back up here, we want them available to answer any of the questions that you may have or topics or themes that came up during your table discussions. If you have any questions, feel free to put them into the Q&A, and I'll be monitoring that. You can also in the Q&A, if somebody's putting in a question that you agree with or that you want to have answered, you can vote it up so it rises to the top, and we'll make sure that one gets answered. In addition to that, we're going to have a couple of our tables report out. So in addition to Randy, Joe, and Juan being up on stage, if we could also have randomly selected table captains Carol Payne McGovern, Deanna Rolfs, Kathy Glynn, Neil Carlson, and Wendy Randall with us. And we will now, why don't we start with Wendy Randall. Could you start with your report out while we wait for some questions to hit the Q&A? We'd love to hear what happened what was your discussion like at your table?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tracy. And hello, everyone. It's good to see so many familiar faces, as well as meet some folks that I have not met before. So so happy to be here. So we had really robust conversation at our table, and really got to some of the both personal experiences as well as kind of broad observations. So a couple things of note, there was really strong consensus around the environment of nepotism that exists in our community, both in employment opportunities as well as in community leadership opportunities. So kind of the fact that, we as a workforce or as society, we've kind of said, it's who you know, not what you know. Well, that has kind of hit the extreme in this community where the same people are always being tapped for the same initiatives or the same conversations. The hiring policies within some powerful organizations have not been modified to take away bias or to take away that influence of who you know. And so there's this really intense struggle of helping people who are not networked be in that space of opportunity, again, both for employment as well as for leadership. Another challenge is the tension of the qualifications or the requirements that are placed on small businesses or businesses that are owned and operated by the BIPOC community, that not having support and simply being in that mode of survival and attempting to grow without being able to meet those complicated qualifications and requirements, without having the capacity to take on larger opportunities for business partnerships. The other thing we talked about was our community does a really good job of patting ourselves on the back. We talk a lot about the things we've done well, and they might be little pockets of things we've done well, but it takes away that sense of urgency. And so we really appreciate that the information that was presented ahead of our discussion really reinforced a lot of the things that we know to be true and that we've observed anecdotally in our own environments. And now we have to really ensure that that sense of urgency is consistent, and that we're not just talking about it for a brief moment and then looking back 6 months from now and saying, well, we did a really good job of talking about that, and kind of letting it go from there. So really, making sure that we're maintaining a sense of urgency. We also talked about the savior mentality, rather than releasing power, relinquishing power, and allowing community members to make decisions. Again, we might do those things in small pockets, but how do we make that really a consistent, broad approach that we're all comfortable with, that we all adopt, rather than continuing to perpetuate that savior mentality? So those are, one last thing. I'm sorry, I know I'm taking up a lot of time. One last thing is really being able to separate out intent versus impact. And recognizing that that concept of positive intent is really a defense mechanism oftentimes, and it's another form of, or another evidence of, the fragility that white people often bring into difficult conversations. So starting to look at not just people's intent, but really help people kind of grapple with the impact of what's happening, and where that intent has been driven by bias that they haven't brought forward yet. So, like I said, really great, robust conversation at our table. Really happy to bring forward some of these ideas, and not only to look at it from this global perspective, but being able to look at the individualized trauma as well, and that sense of hopelessness and unwillingness, or inability, really, rather than unwillingness, inability to take risks and to trust because of the experiences that folks have felt.
Great. Thank you so much, Wendy. Thank you for sharing and for leading and facilitating what sounds like a very in-depth conversation at your table. Juan, Joe, Randy, wonder if there's any thoughts regarding what Wendy brought up. I think she brought up a couple of interesting points. I know that, we often talk about the power struggle, that community engagement is one thing, but giving up power is another. And this community definitely struggles with that second part. So just wondering if you guys have any thoughts on that, or anything else that Wendy's table discussed.
I just want to point out what Wendy said about her group talking about the sense of urgency. I think that's primary here. We have got to stop talking so much about this and actually getting to some action steps, some vision, and moving forward.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that took me back.
Yeah,
Joe and I have actually had this. Go ahead.
Joe, hold on. Well, I think Randy, why don't you continue on with where you are, and then Joe will come over to you.
Randy.
All right, sorry about that. No, it reminds me of a conversation Joe and I had when I first came to town. I worked in Omaha, Nebraska, with his peer there, and the head of the Urban League, and we were having lots of these same sort of conversations about probably 5-8 years ago, I guess. And he really just had a great way of calling the question. He said, what are we going to do? Like, let's stop talking. What are we going to do? We need to start just flat out. We just need to start hiring more people of color. We need to start helping accelerate the growth of, and we did. We stopped the planning. We stopped the strategic planning conversation, just started to figure out what are the things that we can start today to get the ball rolling. And it wasn't necessarily the big sort of 10-year sort of horizon kind of project we were able to help advance, but we got the ball moving. And once we got momentum, the numbers started to change. And I would tell you, Omaha, of all places, is ahead of us in this inclusive growth work. They are making great strides on entrepreneurship, great strides on elevating career opportunities and at all levels within companies. And I think that conversation back with Tom, that was a pivotal moment for Omaha, and it really helped get them to the next level. But it really just takes, we have to start. To Juan's point, everybody's got to take a step forward. It's going to take all of us filling our role, doing our part, and with a greater sense of urgency to get to action, not just to a plan.
Joe, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, just thanks so much for the report out, Wendy. I think it is fair to say that that's the accuracy behind the recognition of nepotism within our community, whether
Joe, I think you might be having some connectivity issues. You just went out. So we'll hold that thought. And when Joe comes back, we will have him finish that thought. I'm going to take a question out of the Q&A that has come in. First one being, in light of the polarization in today's society, to what extent do we need and can we get full community understanding and buy-in in order to achieve an equitable economy? It's a big question. Who wants to start with that one?
I guess if you don't mind, Juan, I'll jump in. But I wonder, to me, waiting for, expecting full, the big word there is full community understanding. That to me feels like that would take us too long and cause us to delay getting to action. So if we connect it back to our earlier or the just prior conversation, to me, I think the key right now is how do we get started, how we get more things started that move in the right direction. And I think we have to go with the willing and not necessarily wait for everybody to catch up. In time, they can join the party and we can keep the tent growing and growing. But I think right now, my push would be towards action rather than action with the willing, rather than wait for everybody to come on board.
Yeah, I think we have a critical mass, and Randy's right. We can't wait for everybody to get on board. It'll never happen. But this has a critical mass that's ready to move forward and take some action.
Great. Thank you. Deanna, would you like to report out on your table discussion?
Sure, Tracy, thanks. Tracy, and just to check, I should share highlights from both questions, correct?
Yes, please. Yes,
okay,
please.
Awesome. So these are all quotes. Starting with question 1, we do not often acknowledge power. We don't listen to the voices and act based on the wisdom, experiences, ideas of people who are living marginalized experiences every day. We have a bunch of white people trying to solve this problem. We don't have the right people around the table. The current board governance structures, unless you're paying particular attention to whom you bring on the board, continues white privilege, Christian homogenous outlook on our boards. West Michigan Nice, aka West Michigan passive aggressive, is not an inclusion strategy. We have not been able to garnish the right people to have the conversation. Folks with marginalized identities may not tell the truth when asked to speak the truth because there's huge power dynamics to conform and not name the inequity. Unless we bridge that divide, we'll continue to be separate and inequitable. We must understand it's critical to teach issues of inequity. There is lack of wraparound supports for children, lack of support for people of color that want to start businesses or nonprofits. Quote, Latino community doesn't care about CRT because when we talk about these trainings, we're putting white students and white folks in the center again. As a person of color, I learned West Michigan Nice the hard way. There's no need for safe spaces because there really aren't any. A lot of education needs to take place in rural America, across America, and we aren't doing it. So basically the concept that these aren't just urban, quote unquote, urban issues. And that a customer said, this is a quote, we don't need DEI trainings because we're all white. We're an all white organization. So the need to harness the knowledge that we truly need diversity to be more competitive. And then on the first question, last point is we enculturate those with privilege to lead, to own, to decide. And we must realize that our youth will be outsiders, our meaning white youth, dominant culture youth, if they don't know how to live in diversity, the ignorance of not knowing is important to break down. And then question 2, a couple highlights here. Ideas were to provide support, access, capital. BIPOC-founded nonprofits need access to funding, make monies accessible. A lot of this conversation without strings that limit, that continue to go. And we talked about a lot of funds and certain monies that continue to go and have like a quote unquote access challenge to young, and then the monies just continue to go to those with more privilege. There was an idea to allocate more resources to connect the dots between talent and monies. There was a conversation about how we build capacity to be ready to draw down funds when there are usually quite significant limits, time limits, on how you can apply for or request these. There was a call for increased communication, access to grant writing. And then lastly, power isn't a zero-sum game. We often think it is, but when we share it, there actually isn't less of it. It does compound and grow. So to shift that misnomer. Great job, team.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, sounds like great discussion at your table. Randy and Juan, any thoughts on what Deanna's table discussed? Definitely some overlaps with what we heard from Wendy's table. Similar lines of thinking and discussion. So wondering if there's anything additional you'd want to add.
I particularly like the fact that this was brought up, which is about young people and learning to live in a diverse society. There's a lot of damage being done by not having enough diversity and having our schools still very segregated. And I think our young people actually don't want that. I think they want more diversity. That's my sense. But we have to make that possible in many ways, not just in school, but outside of school.
Yeah, I'll maybe Tracy take a couple of the questions that were a little bit geared towards business and kind of the opportunity and the capacity building that's out there and the need for capacity building. When we talk with area businesses about the imperative to diversify their supply chain, typically purchasing managers are trying to reduce costs. That's just the nature of their work. And so it almost is in conflict with smaller companies trying to grow into that space. They might not, if they're relatively new, if they're relatively early in their development, they might not be able to be competitive with a company or a supplier that's been around for 25 years that's perfected their process. But what gets lost in that analysis is, Harvard did a study recently that showed companies that have a diversified supply chain can see their sales increase because they're now getting better intel to what their end customers want. They get a better view of the entirety of the customer base. And so that purchasing decision grows the business on the sales side, not just trying to cut costs like most purchasing managers. So that sort of education needs to be out there so they understand the business imperative there. The other piece that is the capacity building. And I think it's a critical time for us to have that discussion. And I've had it with a number of people individually who are participating today. But when I think back to, today, there's more federal money flowing through the world, through the country than ever before. And I suspect more than ever will again in our lifetimes anyway. And you look at what happened with the PPP, the Payroll Protection Program designed for small businesses, and the attachment to the banks, that requirement really caused a discrepancy in terms of who ultimately received those dollars. So many entrepreneurs of color do not have those traditional, or disproportionate number don't have that traditional banking relationship, which then boxed them out from these dollars. Fast forward to this summer, we saw a number of grant application opportunities coming through, or just the tip of the iceberg really, on applying for federal grants for additional stimulus money that's out there. And as I read through some of those applications, it was abundantly clear those applications that I was reading through today felt like the applications I was reading 20 years ago. And while there's a lot of talk out of DC for more equity and more diversity in terms of how these grants are deployed, I can tell you just from 25 years of experience, the grant changed minimally to that effect. And I suspect the scoring rubric behind the scenes probably changed even less. So I think it's incumbent upon us as a community today to build out that capacity so our organizations, many of whom are on this call today, are best prepared to go compete for those dollars. I think the applications that I've seen to date are geared for the traditional recipients to receive them again. And if we don't step up and help our multitude of organizations really prepare, whether it's grant writing or I think even advance of grant writing, take some of their big ideas and get them to paper. So when the application comes forward with a 60-day turnaround, they can cut and paste and be ready to go. That to me is it's a challenge for DC that we're not going to be able to change in the near term. We have to change ourselves. And I think that's getting our organizations better equipped and better capacitized to compete and win those grants.
Thank you, Randy and Juan.
Wendy was on mute when she was snapping, so it doesn't count.
Another question from the chat. So as we discuss access, representation, and power, curious the demographics of the group at the APC today. Can we speak to strategies for organizations and groups to do this better? Oops, Randy, you're muted. You were starting to talk. Juan, yes.
Oh, I was just rereading the question, Tracy.
Okay.
I'm concerned about that. But I think part of the action that needs to be taken is how do we get more on the ground community people involved in some of these. The city has done, and the public schools, Grand Rapids at least that I'm familiar with, have done community gatherings to get input. And so I do think we need to get out into the community and ask for input. I have an experience once where, just as an example, we thought we had an answer. Well, this is when I was with the community college, and we were going out into a neighborhood and giving them what we thought was needed. And somebody at a community meeting spoke up and said, that's not what we need. Did anybody ask us? And a long time ago, and I think it was very true, become community, door to door, and asked questions and got great feedback, and actually started a very different program than we thought. And it was very successful, and it was what the community wanted, needed, and they had an answer to a problem that others did not. So we have to be very conscious about bringing our community forward and building trust and letting them know that they have power in terms of really identifying what the solutions are. And so to me, that's part of a process that we have to build that's much more regular and normal than it's ever been before.
And Randy, before you jump in, Joe, I just want to restate the question because I see you were able to hop back on with us and wanted you to know which question we're talking about. We're talking about a question in the Q&A that says, as we discuss access, representation, and power, curious the demographics of the group at the APC today. Can we speak to strategies for organizations and groups to do this better? So just wanted to let you know where we are. And then Randy, did you have thoughts to share?
Honestly, this is one where we've got to get better too. When I look at our programs and events, we've moved the needle just a little bit. We need to move it a lot more. And so I'm curious to listen to some ideas from this group throughout the balance of the day.
Oh, and it looks like Joe's still having connectivity issues. So,
Tracy,
oh, there you are. Hello? No.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. A little bit.
Better?
A little bit better. Your video's not working.
Okay. I'm gonna cut the camera off anyway.
Okay. All right.
How's that? Is that better?
Better.
Is that better?
Yep, better.
Yes.
Okay. I want to suggest that as I think when we look at who's who's participating in terms of, who's at the table, and we'll use today as an example. I think it's easy to get either frustrated or just somewhat dejected because it is not perhaps a table that is as diverse as we wish. But I think this is where the power of relationship comes into play, and the need to tap into our own networks to bring folk along, simply because quite often people just are unaware of what tables are assembling and what's being talked about. So I think part of what our role is, especially those here on today, is to take advantage of the fact that we are in a position where we are informed. Now, what are we going to do with the information that we have? And it means going into those places that perhaps aren't necessarily known for assembling folks who are at these tables. I'll give an example. I plan on going probably tomorrow to the barber shop. I will talk extensively with the folks who are there about what we're talking about today. And I will be going to church on Sunday. I'll have an opportunity to have some small group discussions there. I have another event that I'm going to tomorrow evening that will be predominantly African American. I will bring this up. And so I say all that to say that now more than ever, there's a need to be all the more intentional with our communication and our networks, and not necessarily depend on large events or keep our fingers crossed that gatherings will bring together a great diversity in terms of participants. It really does come down to the power of the network of the individual and how we're able to tap into various tables.
Thank you, Joe. Another question in the chat that's been voted up, so it's up near the top of my list. People like bottom line results from their investments in the future, equity in the future and equity, but that doesn't ultimately lead to meaningful change. How can we properly measure success/outcomes in this space? I mean, it's one of those big questions, right? It's those questions where you're doing large systems change work, and how do you measure your incremental change when so much of the work that's done is looking for results, is how I'm interpreting this question, is looking for results much, much faster, right? And I'm speaking as a funder, and for my funding peers, where we are guilty of driving this, just like government funding, drives a lot of things towards outputs and not systematic structural change that can take decades to realize. So what are the thoughts on how do we balance that tension to be able to see change, but knowing that it's going to take a really long time when you want to move systems and structures that are embedded in oppression over centuries, and you want to try to move them in years, right? Because people are hurting and dying today. So,
Tracy,
yeah.
this is Joe. I think that this is when it's critically important to use a strategic lens and to really hone in on certain parts of community and to intentionally focus and drill down in that particular community in hopes of getting the type of outcomes and the change that we want to see. To your point, the amount of time and patience that's needed to wait for significant change across the board, or meaningful change across the board, we don't have the time for that right now. And so, I used an example. We had a workshop this week at City Hall looking at our priorities, our budget priorities as a commission at the halfway point. And I stated, and I believe this, when we look at police presence in communities, in communities of color, I want to suggest that if you look at communities within Grand Rapids in which you have stable housing, you have a solid socioeconomic level, there's limited police presence. And I would use my own neighborhood as an example. I don't see the police much where I live. I just don't. I have to look for them, in fact, and I see that as a good thing. However, and I think that's for a couple of reasons. One, I live in an area in which the housing prices are very stable. Vast majority of my neighbors, to my knowledge, are employed and well employed. And so the thought is a correlation between income and housing and the need or the limited need of police presence. If I go into certain neighborhoods within 495-7, certain parts of our beloved community, where you have limited income, low income, you have housing that is not in great shape, and you have significant police presence. Now, one could point to the fact that you have that because historically you have greater police presence in Black and brown communities. But I want to suggest that if you were to take that same community and there was increased opportunity and there was, income and opportunity, a growing household or home values, I want to suggest that that would then be a reason to have less police presence. Simply because why should or would it be any different in that neighborhood than it is in my neighborhood? And with the similarities being home values and higher levels of income. And so I say all that to say that there's a need right now to be both prescriptive as well as intentional, as well as unapologetic in trying to get to a place where we have inclusive economic growth. And I don't think we have any time even to apologize in our efforts to try to get this thing done. There's no need to, because inequity, if we continue down this path of inequity, got a dear friend of mine, we have this saying that we fall to quite often, and that is, it's not going to end well. And that's not a scare tactic, but it's just not going to end well for us as a community, because we're going to either be stagnant and just kind of sitting in the middle in terms of medium-sized cities, or we're going to plummet. And so now is the time, and this is the place. And again, we need not be apologetic. We need to be intentional, and we need to still saying, ask for forgiveness before asking for permission.
Thank you, Joe. Randy or Juan? Randy, I see you.
Tracy, it seems to me the question really speaks to what I believe are the strengths of KConnect, which is, in talking with Salvador over the last few months since getting back to town, is how do you set the target long term and then work back on one of those intermediate steps. So I think it's going to be a healthy conversation with KConnect to determine. But I would imagine, as we've talked throughout the session, income growth, income equality, entrepreneurial startups and the scale of those startups, health outcomes, life expectancy outcomes, frankly, those are the biggest high-level metrics that come to mind now. But I also think it's important, as the question alludes, it's the balance. We have to set those long-term targets and work towards those. But to Joe's point, we have to start immediately. And, from my perspective, I look at us at the right place. Where can we make an impact given the work that we do? And we're certainly starting the bulk of our effort on that talent piece, and how do we better align our communities of color, our people of color, with truly good career growth opportunities that can then help move that income needle. And as people make better incomes, their quality of life goes up, some of the bill pressure goes down, and some of their stress goes down. And that's where we're spending our time and energy, and just got to get started.
Just real quickly, add on, I think the metrics are really important. And I think our community with KConnect, also the Johnson Center at Grand Valley, and others, we have great people that can measure these things, but we need short-term and long-term measures. Metrics that can show some successes, low-hanging fruit, give us encouragement, inspiration towards the longer term. And the longer term results, really, this is where we need to be committed as a community collectively, and that is to staying on track for the long haul. Those metrics that are around income and the aggregate of showing the disaggregated data is going to take longer. And so we have to be committed over 10, 12, 15 years towards these efforts for those longer term metrics to show success. But we have to show small along the way. And we also have to look at what are we measuring, making sure we have consensus on that, and how are we evaluating programs. And I know the Johnson Center has been working hard on equitable evaluations and helping organizations, especially foundations, philanthropy, around what would an equitable evaluation look like in a proposal.
Great, thank you. I'm going to take one more question from the chat, and then I'll come to Neil or Dave and have you guys report out. Another question in the chat: how can we ensure inclusion at all stages? First stage, deciding what the work is; second stage, doing the work; and third stage, determining whether the work has been done. How do you ensure inclusion in all of those stages?
Being intentional.
Juan, you touched on it earlier with your point about a project that had been proceeding down the road, and then somebody in the community sort of raised their hand and said, well, that's not what we need. Have you been able to move the needle and help advise on how others can make that change?
Absolutely. And that was actually, we went to the community to tell them what we were going to do, and we thought there would be a lot of support. This was a predominantly African-American school we went to, and the neighborhood, which I'm very familiar with, saw solutions to a problem very differently. And this is the learning. We need those perspectives. So we need them at the table. We need to ensure inclusion by looking around, by not just checking the box that we have 2 of these and 4 of those and so on, but what do we need at the table, and are we represented? Is our community represented for this particular conversation? And being very deliberate about that. And as Joe said, unapologetic about going out and seeking folks that we wouldn't ordinarily see at tables. They've got solutions that others can't see because we're way up here and making everything ethereal, and we need to bring it down to the grassroots level, and we can do a lot there. We can do an awful lot, and we need some other stuff up here too, but we need a lot of the grassroots work.
Joe, anything you wanted to add to that one? All right, we might still be having some audio issues. Neil, would you like to report out on your table discussions?
Happy to, Tracy. Thanks. There's a lot of commonality, but some specificity in our conversation with other things that have already been discussed. In terms of addressing systematic racism, I think in that conversation, I would describe us as just, let's say the words. White supremacy was an intentional role, had an intentional role in creating systems that segregated housing, that allocated transportation disproportionately, and that produced results even today in lived experience that we heard about, that put people who have long tenancies in affordable housing in a position to be evicted in 30 days to a place where they lose access to public transportation because the system doesn't go to the neighborhood they're being pushed to by market forces. And I think that's, there's talking about segregation, about confiscation of property and wealth as a systematic pattern that goes on over and over again as part of the theme. When it comes to solutions, like everyone else, we're pointing to lived experience. And I think to these conversations or questions from the Q&A, that we have to acknowledge the political nature of these things and not just put people of color in temporary, uncompensated, short-term advisory roles, but put them in long-term compensated roles with decision-making authority to distribute significant resources, not just symbolic kit projects. And that includes influencing things like policy over evictions, incentives for developers and landlords, placement of public transit routes and stops, and other things of that sort. And I think I can leave it there.
Great, thank you. Any feedback or perspectives from Randy, Juan, or Joe, if you're able to speak?
Yeah, this political divide that we have is so intense. And I grew up in the 60s, so I can certainly relate to the damage that it does. And I just think we have to keep working on that. There was so much intention in terms of how things were developed and policies made and restrictions put up and all of that. You know, we've come a long way, but we have a long way to go. We have to be more intentional about this thing we talk about is lived experience, and that means that people who are living certain conditions, we need their voice in terms of not just what it's like, but what do they need in terms of changing that picture for them. And so I think these conversations that all of you have been bringing forward are good, they're necessary, and we have to keep grappling with them. They're not easy problems. This is what APC is all about, and KConnect, why it was produced, why it was created, is to have these tough conversations and to try to create some action towards changing that picture, changing it. So everywhere we are, we have a hand in policies, whether you're on a board or whether you're in an organization, you're in a community. Are you getting to the community meetings like town halls or county board meetings or city commission meetings? There are many places where we can have a voice.
Tracy, maybe just to touch on the comment Neil had made about big projects and the need for it's not a new set, but a different set of organizations to take on the leadership of major projects and have made more authority in those roles. We certainly have. I've made a point in my launch here to get to know as many folks as I can, and there's clearly incredible talent and incredible leadership there. But also, as I've heard from them, there haven't been those opportunities to drive major projects and lead them. I think that can change, as I mentioned before, with some of the federal money coming through and philanthropic money now looking to focus in on many of these same topics. So I think part of it is just accelerating that switch and accelerating that transition and making that happen. I think I expect we're going to see that in the near term.
Thank you. All right, we're going to go to Dave.
Yeah, Tracy, I want to.
Yes, go ahead, Joe. Yes.
Yeah, sure. Just real quick, I just want to encourage everyone that although the political landscape is rather muddy right now and just very divisive, I will tell you that I find peace and comfort in knowing that doesn't necessarily speak to the entirety of our community or of our country. And so the ability to find like-minded individuals and to continue to work toward inclusive growth should very much be the goal of all of us, because it's so easy to get pulled into the political mess that we have, and even at the local level, it's messy. But at the end of the day, even for those who are in it head first and are perhaps keeping the mess going, politically. I think there's a real opportunity for us not to get so caught up in that, but really be hyper focused on what can we do for our own community. Like I always say, as much as I want to be a world changer or help to impact changes throughout the country, my greatest concern is that of the 616. And so what is it that we can do right here in our own backyard to be the change that we want to see? That should be the focus. And again, I'm not saying that we have to ignore what's happening throughout the country, but how can we just be hyper focused locally and do all that we can to change and make Grand Rapids that example of what it means to be inclusive.
Thank you. So we're going to go and Dave, if you can report out, and then there's one more question in the chat that I'm going to ask after Dave reports out to wrap up the Q&A portion. So Dave, welcome.
Great. Thanks. Sure. So our Lean but Mighty table had a really vibrant conversation, focused a lot around the healthcare industry too. So we'll kind of use that as just kind of to frame our conversation. But we did start off with talking about a public art project in 49507 that one of our table members was a part of. And we were talking about the white fragility that they experienced and was exhibited by a lot of the business owners in the community as the murals were getting designed and the input was happening. Just they were very concerned about the content of the art that was going to be close to their business. And so that led us to talking, about, well, what's behind some of that, and so much of it is the lack of relationships, between employers and organizations and the communities and the neighborhoods they're within, and how much work, a lot of good things are happening, within the city and the neighborhood summit, as just one example, but, just there needs to be constant and never ending that, we need to work on creating those relationships and getting input from community members, and also, just to try to work and to fight against that systemic racism that they were experiencing in that scenario. Also talked about, along those lines, we talked about the need to compensate people who are providing lived experience input and feedback. So when we talk about we need to go out in the communities and listen to what they want, factoring in compensation into that, and finding ways for that to be an equitable conversation and not just a constant back and forth debate, negotiation. And then we focused a lot of the rest of the conversation around the healthcare industry. Again, just kind of as a framework for what we were focusing on. And the economic impact around systemic racism that we talked about was bringing to light the fact that, nursing programs are very competitive. The admission process is very, very competitive because of the kind of, one aspect being just lack of instructors. So, they have few spots, they have to be, they find these ways to decide who gets into these programs, and they focus on GPA, access to clinicals, academic prowess, and they don't take into account more holistic measures, such as who is this person? What do they represent? And and do they represent our patient population, for example? So by overly focusing on academic measures for admissions process to these programs, it's then driving the demographics of workers in these healthcare occupations to be largely, female, white, and suburban, was the feedback that we're discussing. And talking about ways that we can address that, disrupting the approach to be more holistic for admissions, and take into account more than just the academic measures. And then another conversation was near the end, which I thought connected some things nicely. Mandy brought up an example of a woman that she knew or knows, and a woman of color from Kentwood who had a really good job within the healthcare industry, had the credentials, enjoyed the work, really liked it. However, she never felt a part of the team, had issues, never felt welcomed, never felt like she was, truly like she belonged there. And it got to the point that she decided, I'm just going to walk. I need a better quality of work, better quality of life experience. I'm going to exit this good job and move into another industry that was an income hit, not as good of benefits, not leading necessarily to prosperity, but she felt compelled to choose this path over the good job because of the experiences she was having there, which made me think of something that when I used to work at the Right Place a few years ago, we looked at what is a good job and how do you measure that, and then looking at the demographics of those who have access to good jobs. And in the work that we did with the Brookings at the time, Brookings Institution, they defined a good job as one that paid about $20 an hour, did not require a college degree, but also provided benefits. And when they were able to provide us detail on the demographics of those who have access to good jobs within our community, women of color were by far the most underrepresented in the good, they had far less likelihood of having a good job by that measure. And I think this example that Mandy talked about is a great way to framework, right? Like, she had a good job, but because of systemic racism, she ended up going somewhere else. And, she might have a great life, but when we're talking about prosperity and like what we want for this region, we don't want her to be constrained. We don't want her to be on that cusp of one medical emergency leading to catastrophe. So yeah, so finding ways to support workers and people of color who might have more barriers to accessing good jobs, employers investing in those, supporting them and learning from them too, right? Not just supporting them because those individuals need support, but because the organization needs them to stay. They need them in their workforce. They need to be, to represent their workforce, because it doesn't matter what organization you are. I would argue that like you need to be able to represent and serve whoever your customer or your people might be. And your workforce needs to reflect that as well.
Great. Thank you, Dave. So Randy and Juan, as you think about if there's anything that you want to respond to or reflect upon with Dave's table discussion, I'm going to add in the, I said it was a question. It's really a statement because I think it goes with some of what Dave was talking about that you might want to reflect on as well, is a statement that, our table discussed whether inclusive growth is the right framing or whether really expansive growth is what's needed. Rather than being included with seats at an existing table, what we need is to build new tables. So just throw that out there for reflection in addition to what Dave said. And just as a forewarning, we need to wrap up here in just a couple of minutes. So
real quickly, I would just say, I don't want to get hung up on the words because there's many ways that inclusive growth, inclusive economy, there's many terms that are used out there already. But I want to support the fact that we do need new tables. And I heard something recently that I think is very true. We keep trying to fix systems. Maybe we need new systems, and that would be easier to do. Building is many times easier than remodeling. And so absolutely, and we need new systems, I think, I think the terminology, the words we use is just trying to be reflective of where we're trying to be, who we're trying to be and where we're trying to go. And whatever we come up with at the end of discussions and plans and action, I think is fine, whatever we call it. But I do think it's the behavior, and that is, we need something new. We need something different. We have to be bold.
One that reminds me of the whole Blockbuster and Netflix dynamic, where Blockbuster for forever was the dominant distributor of video content. Anybody here over the age of 40 probably remembers that. And at the same time, this upstart Netflix was bubbling up. Blockbuster had all the money, they had all the expertise, they had all the staff, they had all the advantage to go execute on it. And they just couldn't get out of their routine. They couldn't get out of their structure. They couldn't get out of their systems, to use your words, Juan. And I think you're right. A Netflix sort of mindset here is probably what's in order. How do we break the mold, come up with a new model, new system that helps us accelerate some of this work?
Thank you. Well, I want to thank Juan, Randy, and Joe for this first portion and for your presentation and your feedback. I want to thank all of our table captains for reporting out and taking notes. And thank you to everybody who participated in this portion. I'm not wrapping up. Don't get this tone wrong. We're only going to take a 15-minute break, and then when we come back, we have 2 more questions that we want to pose to you and get feedback and discussion on. So 15 minutes, do what you need to do, stretch, get a cup of coffee, and then meet us right back here. Thank you so much. Oh, welcome back. Hope everybody was able to take just a quick break. So we want to break back out to your tables, and we have 2 more questions we want you to discuss. We're only going to do this for 20 minutes total, so about 10 minutes per question. And the questions we'd like you to discuss at your table and to think about is, 1, a concern in this space is that this topic has been studied and discussed for a long time, but no action has come from these conversations. How might we avoid repeating this? And then number 2, traditionally in Kent County, initiatives like this have left out community voice. How do we ensure that moving forward, we empower the community within the decision-making process? Very similar. That question I know should get good discussion, because I think a lot of your tables discussed it already. So you'll have, again, 20 minutes, 10 minutes per question to reflect on these. Your table captains, again, will take notes and track themes and get that information back to KConnect, because when we come back, our presenters are going to come and do a brief wrap up, and then we'll conclude this portion of the APC. So we will see you after this breakout.
Thank you to everyone who participated in this session and provided feedback. Before we move forward, though, I'd like to touch on something very quickly. The table captains were chosen for a very specific reason. Many times, the global majority population is made to re-traumatize themselves during these conversations to really share out the experiences that the majority population should be taking the lead on. The backgrounds and behind the scenes really made sure to assure that a lot of our table captains were from outside of the global majority populations to ensure that no further re-traumatization would happen from that sector. The KConnect team is going to synthesize all of the information and share it with the network in the near future. We are now going to hear from Salvador Lopez, who is the interim president of the Housing Stability Alliance Backbone Organization. Take it away, Sal.
Good morning, and thank you, Bo. On behalf of the co-chairs, Tasha Blackman and Brad Kessel, and as interim president of the Housing Stability Alliance, I'm happy to be here to share an update about some of the work that the Housing Stability Alliance has been doing. We're excited to update the APC and make a couple of exciting announcements. First, let's take a moment to review how we got here. In May of 2018, KConnect received a letter from concerned community leaders asking for the network's help related to a rise in family homelessness within the community, especially among families of color. What ensued was a 2-year process, including elevating a community conversation, convening cross-sector stakeholders and leaders, facilitating and building trust, analyzing data, and ultimately developing a community plan to systematically address these disparities. This work aligns with KConnect's work plan under home and family stability. One of the many takeaways from the work is that too many organizations were working in isolation from one another. That's where KConnect came in with the collective impact model. Collective impact brings people together in a structured way to achieve social change. In fact, this housing work is a great example of what this framework can do in the community. During this process, participants within the network practice these important principles. Design and implement the initiative with a priority placed on equity. Include community members in the collaborative. Recruit and co-create with cross-sector partners. Use data to continuously learn, adapt, and improve. Cultivate leaders with unique system leadership skills. Focus on system strategies. Build a culture that fosters relationships, trust, and respect across participants, and all while being customized for the local context. The result? A more cohesive system that has developed a common language, strong cross-sector partnerships, a shared measurement system for tracking and analyzing data, and actionable goals that will ultimately close disparity gaps in our community. Part of the work that the Housing Stability Alliance did was create a community plan that includes 5 areas of action, including equity and community engagement, a shared measurement system, high leverage activities, and continuous communication. It also requires a separate backbone organization to move the work forward and operationalize the action steps laid out by the nearly 200 people who helped make it possible. KConnect and the Housing Stability Alliance co-chairs have spent the past year creating this new organization. This new system convener aims to disrupt the current reality for families who face housing instability and homelessness by rewiring systems, establishing new relationships, and dismantling policies that lead to these adverse outcomes. It also seeks to bridge the gaps in the current local housing system so that going forward, it exists to serve the full continuum of Kane County residents, from those who have no housing to those who are housed by choice. By intentionally linking crisis response, housing solutions, homelessness prevention, early intervention, household engagement, affordable housing, and wealth and social capital creation within Kane County, this backbone organization will aim to move all families to stable housing or greater. More specifically, over the next 5 years, a recommended goal is to move at least 1/3 of all families who are currently less than stably housed in the community to stable housing or greater. By doing so, the new backbone could move 7,400 families up the housing stability spectrum. This breaks down to 670 families with no housing, 475 families with temporary housing, 300 families who are soon to lose housing, 3,000 families who are at risk of losing housing, and 3,000 families who are insecurely housed. I am pleased to announce that this new backbone organization is called Housing Kent. I want to give a special shout out to Valentina and Meg from Soul Design, a local design firm that developed a brand that is both transparent and bold. Housing Kent is the backbone organization that will convene and facilitate the Housing Stability Alliance network. Using lessons learned from KConnect, we intentionally branded the backbone organization separately from the network in order to convey a partnership and not confuse the two separate entities. The Housing Stability Alliance submitted articles of incorporation in March of 2021 to obtain a 501c3 status. The team has been tasked with completing the backbone build by the end of 2021. I'm happy to share that the Housing Kent board is working with a firm to hire the organization's first president. The firm is in the process of narrowing down candidates with a selection to come by the end of this year. Housing Kent has also been working hard to convene a diverse board of trustees that includes co-chair Tasha Blackman, co-chairs Brad Kessel, Lynn Farrell, Mayor Rosalind Bliss, Christina Keller, and most recently, Mark Washington and Al Vanderberg. The board will be composed of 11 trustees, and we will be announcing more of the board of trustees as they are confirmed. As Housing Kent prepares for its new president, KConnect is preparing to transition from the backbone organization to a community partner that will support the work. We will continue to update the KConnect network as more develops. There will be opportunities for you to get involved with the work if you're not already involved, so stay tuned. I'd like to transition at this point now to Evelyn Esparza Gonzalez. Evelyn is the Executive Director of the Hispanic Center of Western Michigan, and she has some very important updates related to language access in Western Michigan. Unfortunately, Evelyn was not able to be in person with us today, but we have a recording of her presentation. She will be discussing the center's current and future work and their partnership with KConnect. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Evelyn Esparza Gonzalez, and I'm the Executive Director with the Hispanic Center of Western Michigan. Today, I'm here to speak to everyone about the potential for a Spanish language dashboard. KConnect and the Hispanic Center of Western Michigan have been working together to build data capacity to inform the decision-making direction of the center. Our goal is to provide services and programming that helps our community achieve self-sufficiency and their own definition of prosperity. Earlier this year, the Hispanic Center, along with several community organizations, led and conducted the largest Latinx focus survey in Kane County that included 500 households, 1,800 individuals. 200 of these respondents were Spanish speakers, and about 46% of the total respondents live within the 49503, 49507, and 49509 zip codes. The Hispanic Center approached KConnect to help visualize data and make meaning out of the collected results in order for the Hispanic Center to identify opportunities for the Latinx community in Kane County. RevPAR is the essential in the Latinx community, and the Hispanic Center is a trusted entity that has been serving West Michigan for over 40 years. Over the past 6 months, we have focused our attention on helping to collect and disseminate information about the opportunities and benefits of the Latinx community in West Michigan. This includes collecting and visualizing data that best informs the decisions we make to help people that walk through the center's doors. The Latinx community is one of the fastest growing populations within King County. The progress and opportunities of the Latinx community has not been visualized, more specifically for Spanish-speaking individuals. There is an opportunity for a large and historically marginalized group of limited English proficient individuals to obtain information that is widely available to most people. Many Latinx initiatives have been left out by the systems created to benefit dominant white majority, specifically related to data. How do other organizations working with the Latino populations analyze their data and make decisions based off of it? This question is easy to answer with the use of a Spanish language dashboard that includes data that can be used to advocate for systematic change to benefit our community. The Hispanic Center has identified potential partnerships within the community to best analyze ways the Spanish-speaking population can receive and use information. This involves forming an organized collective with a diverse group of partners that work directly within the Spanish-speaking community, all with the intent of discussing creative solutions that benefits individuals that have been historically being left behind. The initial group of partners includes La Poderosa, the largest Spanish language radio station in King County, faculty from Michigan State University, and the KConnect Data Capacity Work Group. We're in the process of bringing additional partners to the table. There is a lack of accessible data within the Spanish-speaking community, and conversations are underway on how we might work to create Spanish version of the KConnect dashboard. After a closer look into the lack of information, we found that the scarcity of cohesiveness around information being available to Spanish speakers leaves many individuals in the dark. The Spanish-speaking community does not have access to a dashboard that they can understand, and a plan needs to be created to bring various sectors together to build the infrastructure. As far as what's next, once more partnerships are formed, this group can extend their reach to rural areas within the county to provide access to Spanish speakers outside of the greater Grand Rapids area. I want to conclude by providing a couple of objectives that might help move this work forward. Our short-term objective is to translate the KConnect data dashboard and make it accessible to Spanish-speaking community using various media outlets. This would be a first Spanish language dashboard of its kind in the county. Our long-term objective is to begin with to collect and visualize additional data that might continue to inform the Spanish language community and provide unique insight to providers on how they might best serve a wider and more diverse audience.
Thanks again, Evelyn and the Hispanic Center of West Michigan. And for our final presentation today, I'd like to introduce Star Morgan. Star is the Executive Director of the Grand Rapids Early Discovery Center, a member of the Prenatal to Third Grade Work Group and part of the Normal Was Never Enough Committee. I'd also like to welcome and introduce Anne Marie Valdez to the stage. She is the President and CEO of First Steps Kent and sits on the leadership team for the Prenatal to Third Grade Work Group.
For those of you who may not know, First Steps Kent is an independent nonprofit organization founded more than 10 years ago. Our community vision is that every young child in Kent County will enter kindergarten healthy and ready to succeed in school and life. First Steps Kent is working with our community partners to make that vision a reality. As one of KConnect's lead convening partners, we have collaborated on numerous projects and initiatives over the years. We're happy to continue that partnership on the Normal Was Never Enough campaign. This campaign's purpose is to bring awareness and ultimately policy change around the racialized disparities facing young children of color in Kent County. Local data shows that children of color ages 0 to 5 are disproportionately impacted by low birth weight, wealth gaps, housing insecurity, and more.
After all the social distancing, the virtual school, and the Zoom meetings, even though it's been really great to see everyone's pets and children, getting back to normal sounds really appealing. There's a sense of optimism that normal is on the horizon in Kent County. A return to normal feels really comfortable. Normal, though, has never been comfortable for thousands of children and families in our community. A rush back to normal is a return to long-standing and persistent inequalities that have only been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's been further exposed by the nation's increased focus on racial justice. With this in mind, our committee, which you can see on the screen, developed the Normal Was Never Enough campaign. This includes a diverse team of 11 individuals and organizations with a range of experience. Over the past few months, the team has met monthly to develop a new website, social media posts, blog posts, and radio interviews. We want to offer a really big thanks to Well Designed Studios, who has done a phenomenal job with the website and other graphic elements.
The campaign focuses on examining data that illustrates the deep disparities in the early childhood system. Some of the topics discussed are family wealth and income, childcare, healthy births, social determinants of health, parent empowerment, housing security, and kindergarten readiness. The short-term objectives for the campaign include raising awareness and highlighting local organizations that are already working to address these inequities. Long-term objectives include advocating for policy change and ultimately changing the early childhood system as individuals and organizations become more aware of the disparities.
We wanted to share with you one example of our campaign, building an equitable childcare system. When childcare centers closed their doors at the start of the pandemic, America got a really rude awakening about the critical role of early care and education in our community. Without it, parents are forced out of the workforce, which is a really critical issue when employers are struggling to fill positions. While the fallout from COVID-19 has put the industry on even shakier ground, lack of quality, affordable care for families, and really low pay for early educators has been normal for years. Quality early childhood education can cost families more than a housing payment, or even more than college tuition. At the same time, many early education teachers are among the lowest paid workers in the country, and many hold the same degrees as school-age teachers, but also with an additional endorsement in early education. The low wages and benefits, regulatory burdens, long hours with no breaks, and lack of support and respect have really taken a toll on the industry. Michigan has lost 1/3 of its early education providers over the last decade, and that rate of decline has only accelerated since COVID hit. In order to have quality teachers available, it is imperative that early education teachers are valued as professionals, they're viewed as teachers, and they're compensated fairly. Returning to normal isn't enough because teachers and children in Michigan deserve way better than that. Kristen Sobolewski from First Steps Kent really said it well. We look to not just rebuild, but reimagine a better childcare system. With elevation of the profession, we need statewide solutions. We need increased wages, and business management support will be essential for this recovery. Public policy is finally starting to catch up to that reality. The new state budget, if you haven't heard, it has bipartisan support, and it uses COVID relief funds to invest $1.4 billion in childcare stabilization. That is something to celebrate. The changes will make care more affordable for families. It will provide additional money and support to early childhood child care providers, and it'll expand eligibility for public subsidy for early childhood education. This allows vulnerable families to choose early education and childcare for their children based on quality and what fits their needs instead of the cost driving all of those important decisions.
Thank you, Star. This is a strong example of what exactly this campaign is aiming to achieve. By analyzing and sharing the data, interviewing those with lived experiences, highlighting local efforts that are working toward better outcomes, and linking to policy recommendations, each focus area is intended to encourage readers to get involved. Kent County recognizes investing in our youngest children is both the right thing to do and the smart thing to do, as Lou Chamberlain from the First Steps Board often says. We have made great progress in developing a coordinated system of early childhood resources and programs. Collectively, we need to continue our work to address the conditions that lead to disparate outcomes and push for policies that strengthen and empower families and allow all children to thrive.
The Normal Was Never Enough campaign, it's relevant for any organization that works in early childhood space. We would love to have you share social media content and blog posts with your networks. We're including the work of many local agencies in our content, so we might be reaching out to you for engagement. We also welcome ideas for content and guest blog posts. If there's any writers out there, let us know. Actually, you don't have to be a writer, just passionate about impacting young children. We want this campaign to be inclusive and reflective of the community, and we encourage other partners to become involved. So please let us know if you're interested, and look for additional information from First Steps Kent, from KConnect, and the committee about how you can participate and help spread this important information throughout the community. Together, we can build a community where children are happy, they're healthy, and they're living their best lives. Now I'd like to hand it over to Ashanti and Bo to close out the meeting.
Thank you, Star. Great job. Thanks again to Anne Marie Valdez and Star Morgan, colleagues and our friends, for being with us today. We're getting ready to wrap up today's meeting. Stick with us for a couple more minutes. We want to thank you for your time and your engagement today. We know time is a commodity, a valuable one, and that long meetings online can be taxing and exhausting. So at this time, we'd like to ask you to take time and complete the APC evaluation. There should be a link in the chat. Again, we value your feedback. We will process and use your feedback and encourage you to please include your comments. So please take the next couple of minutes to complete that evaluation.